All right, everyone, we're going to get started with our training. This is David Robison with Design Master. Thanks for attending the training. We're going to be talking about one-line diagrams and customization and blocks. If you have any questions, feel free to interrupt me and ask for clarification or anything like that. My plan is to do about half an hour of content on customizing blocks and whatever else we can get to. And then open it up to more general questions on one-line diagrams at that point that anyone might have. And if no one has any questions, we'll just keep going over customization stuff. But I kind of want to give people a chance to just kind of have a regular opportunity to ask some questions that you might not otherwise want to give a phone call for. And give other people a chance to see answers to questions. So we're going to get started here looking at customization for the one-line diagram. And this content, this is all relevant to both people who are using our AutoCAD-based software and for our Revit software, because the Revit one-line diagram is done in AutoCAD. So the commands between the two, we've got the DM Electrical RT, which is our Revit users. This is what they see. And then DM Electrical. This is what the people who use our AutoCAD software see. Before we start looking at the customization, I wanted to review kind of how we have things set up between the different pieces so that we can, so that you know where everything's stored. Because there's a couple layers and levels that we have of where everything is stored. And you have to get them all right in order to actually get customization in there. So we'll be looking at creating some blocks and making some new graphics. So blocks are first stored in a DWG file. So you have some sort of drawing file, just an AutoCAD drawing file sitting on your file system somewhere. And so that's the block that we're going to pull in. Then in Design Master, we have the block list, which is a list of all the blocks of a certain type, like distribution equipment or equipment connections or breakers. So we've got a list of all the different blocks that are going to be used. So just because a block has been created doesn't mean it's actually in the list that Design Master recognizes it as something that we can use. And then finally, we have the actual device that is in the project, and that is then going to point to one of the items on the block list. So looking at that in AutoCAD, all of your block files are going to live in your file system. So if I pull up our customization folder, here's all the drawing files. They're just the blocks. And then the block lists are always under customization. So for one-line diagrams, we've got a couple different block lists. So if we look at, here's the list of blocks that we can use for distribution equipment, panels, and such. So these here are on the right-hand side are the actual drawing file names. On the left is a nice name that you're going to see in the list when you try and insert something. And then when you actually go to insert a device, that block list is what shows up here for your choices for what's actually going to be the graphic used for that specific item. So if we have a panel, we can choose to insert a panel block for it, or we could choose to insert it as a switchboard or whatever we want it to look like. So with that, let's go ahead and go through creating a new block. I've got this graphic here. This is a transformer. Say you don't like our transformers. Our default transformer has the arcs for the transformer. Your company prefers to use the straight lines for the transformer symbol there. So we can create a new block using this. Let's see, if we go to the customization, there's the block creation, and there's the create lost it there. One line diagram block from entity. So this will create a block from something that's inserted on your drawing. And this is probably the simplest way to actually create blocks with our software is open up a drawing, draw something that looks right, insert one of your existing blocks, and then run this command. And it pulls up this dialog where you get to fill in a bunch of information about the block. And then this is going to be used for the definition. So the first thing you need to do is you need to give it a file name just so that when we store the drawing file, it has a name. So we will call this DM Webinar Transformer. It's going to tell you where it's going to save it. By default, this is going to be your customization folder. Generally speaking, you're not going to need to move anything away from there. Then there's also a checkbox for whether you want to put your entities on layer 0. If that's checked, we'll take all the stuff and we'll put it on layer 0 for you, which in general is the best way to create blocks so that the AutoCAD can pull in the different layer information. There are times when you don't want that checked if you want to use the layers you have specified. You'll need to know when those times are just based on basic AutoCAD understanding. So if you're not sure, check it, and if you know why you wouldn't want to check it, you can go ahead and check that and have different colors in your blocks. Then you specify the type of block it's going to be, and each type of block gets defined a little bit differently, so you do need to let the software know whether it's going to be a distribution equipment, a panel, a transformer, something like that, whether it's a branch circuit device, equipment connections and motors, if it's a feeder block, and those are the blocks that we insert on the feeder lines, the breaker and switches and fuses. And then also we have the ability to create meters. So it could also be a meter block. So just specify which kind of block. We're going to create this as distribution equipment. Then you have a couple options for how feeders are connected to this block. You can choose whether how many upstream connection points you have. For something like a generator, you would specify none because there's really nothing up above, so you don't need to bother with it. For the transformer, there's going to be one. For a transfer switch or a UPS, you could choose 2, and then you can actually have 2 upstream connection points. So that way, just when it is automatically generated, the feeders will come in nicely to those points. You can always move the feeders once everything's in there. This will give you nice defaults. You also can choose for the block whether the feeder connections are coming from the left, above, or below. So we always lay out, when we use our automatic generation routines, we always lay out from the left to right. So we never have anything coming in from the right. But if it's coming in from the side, you can have it come in from the left-hand side. You can also have the feeder coming in from above it or below it. And this will help the generate routine know which way to draw the feeders. This one, we're going to be coming in from the top and then going out the bottom, so we'll go in from above. And then we'll run an example from the left there just so you can see the difference. Whether it has a downstream connection point, and there's always going to be just one of those, and then we kind of figure out other connections based upon that. And then same as the upstream connection direction, we have the downstream connection, which way we're going to go out of this block. So we're going to go to below it. In the top right here, we have the slide settings. And so the slide is the little picture that shows up when you select the graphic. If you don't have a slide, you get that blue X, and it looks like you don't have anything there. The blue X just means you don't have a slide. The block can still work, but having a nice slide helps you remember what the block actually looks like. If you have this checked, we'll create a slide automatically for you, and you can choose what color you want the block to look like in the slide. And finally, we have the option down here for the database settings, for the ability to create a record in the project database. So all of this up here is going to be creating the drawing file. So if I pull my picture back up, everything to this point has been dealing with this DWG file. So we'll have a nice block, but we won't be able to select it. So this next set of things is talking about this block list. So do you want to create it as an entry in your block list automatically? You have the option to create as a record for this current project, and then also a record in the master database where future projects would be able to use it. And if you are going to create it, you need to give it a nice name. So I'm going to call it the webinar transformer. And once you've specified all this information, you click OK. And then it's going to ask you a couple more questions to get the actual graphics that are going to be used. So the first thing you do is you select the entities that are going to be used. So we'll choose all of that stuff there. And it'll prompt you based upon the upstream connections, where it's going to connect. So we're going to connect it to this middle point here. We're going to specify the downstream connection point. And then it also wants to know what the insertion base point is for the block. I really want the middle of that, so I'm going to use some fancy AutoCAD drafting to get it. It kind of flashes the screen at you there. That is it creating the slide, and then the block disappears. And you're basically done at that point. So if we go to our customization folder, we'll see that we now have our new webinar drawing file there, and it created the corresponding slide. So that's the DWG file. If we go to the one-line diagram, we can insert a piece of equipment. I can take one of these transformers. And for the block, I can choose to use our webinar transformer, and there it is as an option in our block list. And then it's got that slide that it created. If I click OK, I can put it in there, and it will create the that transformer. Just so you can see where the feeders end up, I'm going to go ahead and throw in the MDP that's above it. You'll see it had the incoming feeder come down into it, and then I'll put in this panel below it, and you'll see that it does the outgoing connection off that off the downstream connection point. It's coming from above and to the below. So it's using that information that we gave it to nicely get everything connected. Pull that out of the way. We can also put labels on the blocks, as I'm sure you're familiar with if you've done anything with our one-line diagrams. You can then save those labels to be used when you insert this block automatically. So I can take this block and we can put a couple of labels on it. I'm going to say we like to include the name of the transformer. We put the name in quotes, so we're going to get a value that looks like that. And then we'll label the KVA on this transformer as well. Just so we have a little bit of information. And then we'll also put in the primary and the secondary volts. Click OK, and then we can specify where we want all of those labels. So I'll put the name there, voltage is here on the other side. Now we've got this block and we've got these labels, and we'd like in the future to be able to use this nice layout automatically without having to worry about any of the putting all these labels on again. So I am going to run another customization command. For block creation, we have create a one-line diagram block from one-line diagram. So this is where you've already used our software to lay out your one-line diagram. You've got a nice block and some labels inserted, and you want to save that for the future. So you run that command, and it brings up a slightly simpler dialog because a lot of the options have already been set because the block already exists. We're just setting some other options here. I'm actually going to overwrite that block, so we're going to use that same block name. We'll leave everything on layer 0, still distribution equipment. We already have the records in the database because they were previously created, and we're just kind of updating that block definition. So I'm going to uncheck those two options. Click OK, and it'll ask for the block to use. You can add other entities if you need them. We'll do a panel, and I'll show you how you could use that in just a moment. For manual, we're going to skip that prompt. kind of does all its flashing again, and now it created that new block for us. If I get rid of it, so it's not on the drawing, we can then run our insert command again, select that transformer, select that same block. See, it created a new slide for us there, showing us that it's actually got labels this time. And then when we insert this transformer, it puts in with those labels included automatically. So now in the future, when you're using transformers, they're all going to come in looking the same. So you get a little bit of an ability to have a consistent look. You're not messing around with labels quite as much for future projects. So all of this that we just did here works for the blocks. We also have the panel boxes in our software, which are what these are actually, where you've actually got this panel with the resizable box, and then you actually can put the bus on there as well. So I'm going to insert panel box with a bus, say for this switchboard. Do something like that. We'll put our bus in. So we've got our switchboard, and then we can put some labels on this, and then we can make this whole thing into a block that's going to be able to be used for future insertions. So we'll put a couple labels on this one. Call this one switchboard. And we'll put the voltage and the bus amps. And put that label here. Now for your labels, you always have the option you can place it somewhere else. If you just press enter, it'll actually group it with the last one that you just put in, and so it can kind of have them all nicely together there. So this is one big group of labels that'll move together nicely. Then we can run our customization block creation command again. And again, I'm going to create the one-line block from the one-line diagram. So I've got this panel box. You know, it's got all our nice options for moving the bus around and for moving the main disconnect connection point. So you can get all that laid out nicely for what you want a switchboard to look like. And then you can create one-line diagram block from one-line diagram. And we'll call this our switchboard. We're going to go ahead and create records in our database here for it. So, and there's one more thing I want to do before we actually create this. So we have this box, but say you like to actually include a ground with this. So you want to have some sort of notation here that this actually has a ground on it. So I'm going to insert a little ground piece here. It's not going to be the prettiest looking, but you get the idea. So we've got a ground that you want to have included as your switchboard. And so this is just standard AutoCAD lines, but you'd like to have it come in automatically when you put in a switchboard. Now when we run our command to create the block, give it the same name.
Learning all that shit, right?
We can say we're going to create records in our project in our master database or not, whichever you prefer. It'll ask for the pieces of equipment, so we're going to select this, and I'll get the panel box and all those labels, and then it's asking for additional objects. So we can choose those pieces from the ground, and it's going to be included in that block when it's created. So now, we should have a new block here, the webinar switchboard. And if I take I'll take this MDP and put it in using that block. When it comes in, it includes that extra piece. Adjust everything to get it all connected nicely there. But you've got that extra piece. And those at this point are just standard AutoCAD entities, so you'll need to move them around and adjust them manually if you move that. But it comes in with it automatically. So again, you can have a little more standardization if you want to do a ground or a neutral or whatever additional information you want to have in that block. You can have it in there. So we've got those slides that we've been looking at, so that when you select one of these, you have the little picture. You can create new slides if you want to clean those up. For example, this one, you know, the picture over here on the side, the label got cut off. What you can do is you can run our command. It's the create slide command. And you can just create a new slide, so you can adjust this to however you want it to look. You know, we might want to pull this so it's not actually in there in that picture that we eventually end up making. And when you run the create slide command, it's just going to ask you for a name for the slide. And the slide name needs to match the block name, and that's how we know which picture to show you. So I'm going to take this transformer slide that we already have and recreate it, basically. I'll say, do you want to recreate it? Say yes to that. And then you draw a box around what you want to take. You're basically taking a little picture, a screenshot of that piece of the drawing. It'll lock up there. We'll run that again, make sure it actually ran properly. So it flashes at you, and then you have that new slide. If we run the insert command, you can see that we've now got a new image. And you'll notice that I kind of did a long skinny box, and you've got extra stuff here. It basically makes it this 4x3 size automatically, so it adds height or width as necessary. So if you end up with extra information like that, and you don't want this extra stuff, you just kind of got to come back here and adjust this. Hey, let's pull all this out of the way, pull this whole transformer down, and then when we make the slide, it won't include those extra pieces. So we'll recreate that slide one last time. And now when we insert that, you can see that the slide has just that actual image and nothing else in there. Now what shows up here, it's purely for your purposes, just so that you know what you're inserting. It doesn't have any bearing on what actually gets inserted or anything else. So you can mess with that if you want to make it look nice, or you can completely ignore it if you don't care that much. But that is how you would go in and adjust what that's looking like. I'm going to now create a block where the feeders are coming in from the side and leaving from the side, just to show you what the difference that ends up looking like. I'm going to insert a copy of this block so that I have something to use. So say we've got a block like this, and we'll actually rotate the whole thing like that. So now we want to come in from the side and leave out the side. So I can run the customization, and I can create my block from entities again. Create another, call it transformer 2. And now instead of from above and to below, will be from the left and to the right. Otherwise, we'll leave everything the same for this block. Select the block to use for what we create. I can choose my upstream connection point. We're going to come in from here. And we go out here. And my base point, I'm just going to eyeball there. So we've got this transformer. I'm going to go ahead and erase that one. And I'm going to put a new one in. New copy of that in. Using our transformer from the side. So when we put this transformer in, how did it do? It didn't make the connections like I would have expected it to there. Let's see if I run my generate command, if it will use that properly. See, I want to see if I can change the default block that one is going to use. So when this transformer comes in, I want to have it use that side transformer. We're going to do a generate. riser. So there's the side transformer we created there, and it looked like it picked up those. As we were using a block that already had some label definitions, it actually pulled those definitions along. So it's including those. But there it's coming in from the side. If I get rid of that now, and I change the block that transformer uses, and I change it back to this other one that's from the top and the bottom, and if I run the generate for the riser again, you'll see that it's coming in top and bottom. So that's the difference that you get when you're choosing which option as to how that ends up looking. Because here it is from the top and the bottom. And if I undo a bunch, here it is from the side. So those are, that's what that option is controlling. So depending on how you want your feeder connections to automatically be generated, that's what you want to select. Take a moment here and pause and see if anyone has any questions on that or has any specific questions on customization that they'd like to have addressed. So does anyone have any questions for us? I'm hearing a lot of silence, which suggests that no one has a specific question. In which case, we'll just continue looking at the other customization options. Oh, I do see one question in the chat. Do we have to make the schedules before the one line so that the connections will happen automatically? So I think what we're trying to ask here is when we're doing this generate, typically, yes, with our software, you create all of your pieces, you create your panels, you create your transformers, you connect them together, and then the one line, you draft that out and it kind of shows you what you've connected, but you do need to do the logical connections ahead of time, kind of lay everything out either in our AutoCAD software or in our Revit software, and then the one line will show you what it ends up, what you actually have put together. In our AutoCAD software, that's pretty simple because you can create items without putting them on the drawing. Revit makes it a little bit more complicated because you have to actually physically locate your panels and transformers on your model and then connect them, and it's kind of backwards to how you actually do the design, and that's just a drawback to Revit, unfortunately. There's another question. Can you show how to customize the feeder so that there is not a block showing the feeder size? If I did not answer that other question about the connections, go ahead and clarify that. I'll give it another shot. So how do we customize the feeder to not show the feeder size? That is a good question, and that one is really easy. That is available under Options. So under Options, we'll look at the project list. We have a whole section devoted to things you can do with the one-line diagram. And it's taller than my screen, all of the different options that you have. The one you're looking for is at the top, Insert Feeder IDs inside feeder lines. Currently set to yes. You don't want them, so you change it to no. And then you won't get the feeder IDs anymore. So if I change that to no, if I generate part of my one line here, no feeder IDs. And so then you could come back and label your feeders, for example, with just the actual feeder size. So I had those two questions from the chat. If anyone else has a question, you can either ask it verbally or you can type one in. Can you move the panels? Did someone else have a question there that they want to ask?
Yeah, I've got one, David.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's Mosby. On your switchboard, what tells Design Master in which order to lay the feeders out across the length of the bus on a switchboard?
There's a lot of feedback there for a moment. To ask, there's one person asking, can you access this video after today? And the answer to that is yes. This is being recorded. I will eventually get these posted, and then I'll be sending out probably into the newsletter or whatever information on how to connect to view them in the future. So yeah, all of these will be recorded, and you can watch them again, or you can watch them if you missed them. So Mosby was asking how it chooses to lay out the devices, and the answer to that is that it is laid out. We went through a couple different iterations based upon feedback, and I believe it is currently laid out based upon distance between the panels. So the ones that are closer are farther to the left, ones that are farther away are to the right. If they're all the same distance, I believe it goes alphabetical. I've also gotten feedback that people would like a little bit more control over that they're not happy with how they come in automatically. So on the list of things to do for the future is to add an option so that you can have a little more control over what it chooses as the default. Distance, alphabetical, arbitrary ordering based upon some user interface we haven't figured out quite yet, so that you can kind of lay them out how you want them, so that when it puts them in right rather than wrong, and then having to go back and do a bunch of adjusting. So that's the answer to that one. And then we have the other question from the chat, can you move the panels? And the answer to that is yes. So if you come in here and you move any of the panels on our one line, it pulls the feeders along for you. And then when you add more panels, if you run the generate again, it's not going to move those again. So if you kind of get this whole section laid out nicely, and then we generate, let's generate the whole thing, that section isn't going to be touched, and it'll kind of lay out everything else around it. And it kind of ends up all getting mashed together because there wasn't quite enough room for everything. But it didn't move any of it. Any other questions? I'm watching the chat to see if anyone else has anything they're going to type in or anything anyone wants to ask. We use AutoCAD MEP. Is the software exactly the same as another question? The answer to that is yes. So AutoCAD MEP adds another layer of information on top of AutoCAD. I mean, it's basically a competitor to what Design Master for AutoCAD is doing, and Revit for that matter. So we don't use anything that AutoCAD MEP has. So if you use an AutoCAD MEP light fixture or panel, we don't recognize it as such. But our software just pretends like it's normal AutoCAD and works exactly the same within it. So we don't take advantage of any of the MEP stuff, but it doesn't hurt it either. So AutoCAD versus AutoCAD MEP doesn't matter. All right. To make another block. We were looking at blocks for distribution equipment. We're going to create a block that is a feeder block. So on your feeders here, so everyone's familiar with how it works, you have an option for what your circuit breakers look like. You can also throw blocks in at the start and the ends of the feeders, which are what these are. And also, since we're here, you can turn the feeder ID on and off on an individual feeder. So if they're on for everything, you can turn them off for individual feeders. So if you want to have the customization. If they're off, they're just off and no changes here are going to have any effect. But if you do turn them on, you can turn them off on individual feeders. So we're going to put in a circuit breaker. So the feeder blocks are the ones that show up on your feeder lines here. They track along nicely on your feeders like that. So we've got these blocks here. I'm going to go ahead and create a block that is a circuit breaker plus a meter, because say you have a meter center and basically all of your feeders have a meter and you'd like to show that. Our software doesn't really address that very directly because it's kind of outside. It doesn't impact what we're doing terribly much. So you just need the graphic on your one line. So we'll go ahead and create a circuit breaker that also has a meter with it, so that then you can put that in as your circuit breaker block and it'll kind of be labeled automatically. I'm watching the chat. If you have other questions, just go ahead and type those in there. We'll finish up this block and then I'll pick up any questions that have appeared. So we're going to create, I should have created this ahead of time, but this will work. We're going to create a very simple breaker because I don't want to make an arc. So there's my circuit breaker, and then I'm going to create my meter, and we'll put an M in it. And there's a line between the breaker and the meter. All right, so there's our very crude circuit breaker and meter that we would like to create as a new block. We do that the same way with the block creation. Create one line diagram block from entities, because we just got some stuff we drew on the drawing there. This is our webinar breaker and meter combination. We're going to say this is a feeder block, so it's something that shows up on the feeder. You see it disables a bunch of the options that are no longer appropriate for it, so you can't specify these things because it doesn't have that. And then we'll follow our breaker and our meter. And it's going to ask us some questions again. Okay, what entities should be included in the block? I'll choose these items here. The upstream connection point, where you're going to connect on the block. So we'll go from there. And then our downstream connection point. Then it's asking for a mirroring point, and this you can. It's a grip that'll show up, so you can actually flip the block across the feeder, and it flashes and it creates the block for us. Now we can come in and change our graphics. Use that feeder. We've got our new breaker meter here. And so now we have our new block that we've created. And if we wanted this to be used for all of these, we're going to need a little more space there, but if I pull this over here, now we've got space where we could actually put that on all of them. And the command, select all of them, and set them all to use that new block. So now they've all got a breaker and a meter being shown there. And that there's a prompt for the grip point for flipping it. That's this grip here, so we can select there, and then we can actually mirror it across the feeder line. Then there's a question from the chat. Is it possible to show existing versus new, or remaining versus demo equipment, in particular importing from Revit? And so the answer to that is that you can. We don't currently pull in phases from Revit. Those are so you have to specify all this manually in the one-line diagram. But you can do it once it's been imported here. We're hoping in the future to be able to pull that information from the Revit model and set it all automatically. So here's the DM Electrical RT ribbon, and there's the change layer system. So new versus existing versus demo, we call those layer systems because at some level it's just changing the layers that are used for items. So if we do our change layer system, you can choose something and it'll tell you what it currently is, and then you can choose a new option for it. So I can change these to be existing feeders, and it's going to change it to an existing layer system. all of those colors are controlled in our layers customization. So you have all of your layer systems listed here, and for each system you have the list of layers that are going to be used. So our new layer system tells it, use these layers for everything. They're all EN layers by default. And we've got existing. You can actually create a new, so if you want to create a demo system or whatever else you want to do for your layering, you can do that here. And since we're here, we'll go ahead and take a look a little bit more at layers and the options we have for that. So you select the layer system, and then in the top right you have your layer keys, and on the left-hand side the key is the Design Master label. It's how Design Master is used, what it's thinking about the layer, and on the right is the actual layer name that's going to be used, and then down here at the bottom is the definition of that layer, basically what's going to be created in AutoCAD. You can see that for each layer key, the layer name can be shared. We have more layer keys than most people actually use, but everyone likes to do their layers a little differently, so we have options that maybe you're not using, but someone else likes to do a different layer for that. So if you want to have your equipment and your panels and your switchboards on different layers, you have an option for that, or you can put them all on the same layer. If you want to create a new layer, you can go here, click New Layer, give it a new name, give it a definition, and then you can choose that layer from the list. If you have a bunch of layers to work with, you can actually export this whole list to Excel. Use Excel to do search and replace and make all your changes, and then import the layers back from Excel. So those are convenient features for dealing with if you're making changes to a lot of layers. And so there's a question on the layers. Where is a complete layer list located at? We don't really have a complete list of the layers in our software beyond what you see here. So we don't have anywhere where, and maybe he says you just answered it. So I think hopefully I gave you a good answer. The best place if you do want to see the list of layers would be to import and export from Excel. Yeah, use the export to Excel as you just commented there, and then you can get it all in there. Picking up this other question, is there any way to make text annotative in blocks we create when it is mirrored or rotated so the text remains upright, or scale up and down so it's a certain size? So we do not support annotative text in our software. That's just not something that we've had a chance to do. So all of our text is going to be a specific size. However, you can choose that size in text styles. And so you can specify the size of your text, 1/10 inch, 1/4 inch. And then as long as you set your dim scale properly, we will get the text in the right size. And then I was hoping no one would notice this, but he's pointing out that when you flipped this, that M flipped, and that's awkward and not really what you want to have happen. And you can get that to work right. I'm going to see if I can, I'm pulling that block. Actually, I'm just going to go modify that block directly because I think that would be the simplest way to do it. So we have, in customization, a command to open a block from the drawing. This is where you want to go to a block definition and make a change to it. We'll go hunt down that block for you without having you mess around with where your files are stored. So we'll run that command. We'll select this feeder, and that's the only block on the feeder. So we'll say, hey, here's that block definition, and there's that M that is flipping around and not working nicely. I'm going to get rid of it. And we have, in block creation, insert non-rotating text. So if you insert a standard piece of text, when you rotate the block, the text rotates, and it ends up looking kind of messy. We have this option here to insert non-rotating text, and this will create a piece of text in any block one-line diagram or any of our other stuff, equipment connections, J-boxes, what have you, that when you rotate the block, the text will actually rotate it back to be at an angle 0, so it reads nicely. So I'm going to run that. It asks for the insertion point, and this is always the center point of the text, and then the text value, and it is going to ask for a height, so I'll draw it in. So now we've got that better defined piece of text. It's actually nicely centered because I took a moment to do it nicely. I'm going to save this drawing. So now we have that text that should work properly. I'm going to close this. So for future drawings, that block will be used. This drawing already has that block defined, and so that block doesn't get updated unless you tell it specifically to update that block. It's just kind of a function of how AutoCAD works. Once you have a block definition, you kind of have to work to get that block to update. We have a nice command in our software, Redefine Block, in this drawing, which will do exactly that. That's where you go and make a change to a block, and then it'll update the definition in your drawing for you. And we select that, and I was afraid of this, and so there's a bug that we'll need to test. Actually, I'm going to do one change real quick before I decide that doesn't work properly. Attributes are weird, yeah. So we're not pulling in that attribute properly for that. So for our feeder blocks, currently you can't, and so I'm making a note of that as a bug because it should work properly there. So that's something I get to work on this afternoon once we're done with this training class, getting that to work. And then checking out the two other questions. Can you change the line type? That's an easy question, and the answer to that is yes. So we've got all the line types here. So when you define a layer with our software, you can define the line type that will be used for it, and then that line type obviously will be used when you create the item in AutoCAD. So I can go here. And I'm going to change that to be the right EN1 line layer. And we can actually change the line type here. I'm going to make this, we'll see if this phantom layer turns out. Anytime you make changes to the layers, again, like blocks, once they exist in the drawing, you have to update the drawing to have that new definition. So we have a command say, hey, I made some changes to my layers. Let's make this drawing match what I just did. So it pulled in that new line type, and so now these are using that phantom definition. So we've actually got a line type happening there. And then another question, typically risers in Revit are not shown in color, but black and white and grayscale. How will transferring this drawing to Revit be depicted, in particular new versus existing? So when you pull things into Revit, you pull it in using the link CAD command, and that pulls the drawing in to Revit. And I honestly don't know what Revit does with colors versus line types. I haven't really investigated that with Revit. But given that I know people are using this in Revit, I'm sure there's a way to have layers mapped to certain line weights, basically, is what you're concerned about when you're actually doing your plotting of the new versus new stuff heavy, the light the stuff light. So I'm pretty sure that there are ways to do that. I don't know about, but I would guess there's good Revit tutorials we could look up online. If anyone does need additional help on that, I'm getting an answer. That is controlled with the export to drawing command in Revit. Yeah, so it can be done. It's just going to be a little bit of Revit work to make that happen. I also get the comment that it's a big pain. So sorry about that. Maybe you should just plot from AutoCAD. Any other questions? Any other customization you want to see? If not, I'm going to go ahead and take a look at another customization section we have here. That is the default labels. So we have one line diagram, default labels. And this looks like the insert label command we have, but it has a list of all of the labels for all of the different types of devices. So we've got all our panel labels, and then all our labels for everything else. What this allows you to do is to specify prefixes and suffixes and all that information for your labels that if your block already has this defined, we'll use the definition from the block. But if you're just inserting a block that doesn't have it and then you go to insert a label, we'll fill this information in for you automatically. So it's another way to specify how you like your labels to look. So we could say our panels, we always want to have the panel description have panel at the beginning because that seems appropriate. And the bus amps always is going to have an A as a suffix for the amps. And we'll just leave it at that for right now. So we make those two changes. And so now I'm going to go ahead and put in a new panel. Take this panel here. I'm going to do just a blank panel. It's not going to have any labels with it. When we run the insert and modify labels command, it pulls those default label definitions. So it says, I'll put in this panel prefix, I'll put in this bus amp suffix, so that information comes in automatically. So that if you don't have a block with those labels defined, you can have the label information if you're constantly reusing that already set. So now we can choose to, let's include those, and then we can put it in there. You can also get a panel looking nicely, so you could put that in. Maybe you want to specify the mounting, and we want to put in the lugs as well. We'll put in a couple more notes. We'll put those here at the bottom. You can then run that same command, and you can pull those label definitions in from something that's already on the drawing. So if I run the default labels, that's this copy labels from drawing command, where you say, hey, this one's got all the labels I like to use. Let's copy it in, and it filled in that mounting and that lug. So you can have a panel that looks good, that you've spent a little time on, and you can pull those labels in here automatically. We've got a couple more minutes here. I'm going to go walk through a couple of our options to close us out, unless I see more questions come in. This is the options as the Revit people see it. Slightly fewer because they just have fewer different types of equipment that we see. We were looking at the insert feeder IDs inside feeder lines. We already looked at that one. I want to highlight these default blocks. So when you create a panel or a transformer, there's a block that's going to be used by default when we draw that. And this is where you change that. So we have an option here for the default block that's used in a riser. And then we have actually two for when we do our one line where it's the top-down view. One if there are multiple connections, and then one if there's a 0 or 1 connection. For panels, it's basically whether it's kind of a switchboard or a panel. So a lot of people draw the switchboard with multiple connections one way. They'll put a bus or something. And then the individual panels that are just kind of serving lights or whatever, that don't have a whole lot of connections, they draw a different way. So you have an option for two different choices there for what the graphics are going to be. And you can set them to be the same. And for here, it's listing just the block name. So it gives you the list of block names by default. You can use Browse to go select the specific block, or you can actually just type in a block name if you happen to know what it is. In the same way as we've got that for all the pieces of equipment, you can set your default overcurrent protection block, and then you can also specify various other blocks that we put in for main breakers, for panels, and then also lug connections. So that's all the default block settings that you can use to choose what you're going to have used automatically. That can also be on a specific device basis. You can override that to use a different block.